Thank you for gathering for this seminar. We've got about an hour ahead of us, and we'll be talking about the topic of leading change. So my name is Dave Patty. I'm sitting in Friedland in the Czech Republic right now, where I've lived for the past 28 years and have served in this region with an organization called Josiah Venture. We work with local churches in 16 countries of Central and Eastern Europe to help them develop strong disciple-making ministries to young people. So my calling, my heart has been about equipping the local church and reaching young people, reaching the next generation, and disciple-making as well. So thank you for gathering for this time. And let me just say a few things about how to get the most out of the session that's ahead of us. First of all, please have your Bibles with you. We'll be looking at them. Also, you might want something to take notes. One of the first questions we should ask, and I'll start sharing my screen now, is the question of why in the world do we even want to lead change? Now, we don't want to lead change just for change's sake. We don't want to change just for the fun of it, because not all change is good. Sometimes change can make something worse. But there are several reasons why we need to lead change and why you may need to lead change. One of them is that people change. And so as you're working with a church, let's say you're a pastor working with a church or you're leading a ministry, if you're doing a good job, the people that are under your care will grow and they'll move, which means that where they're at this year is different than where they were at last year. What they need this year is different than what they needed last year. And sometimes a program can be perfect and be accomplishing so much that it stops working because it was working, because it moved people and now the people are in a different place. So as your church grows, a room that worked well for you stops working. Style of ministry that worked because you could do discussion stops working because there's too many people in the room. Maybe you've been training leaders and your training has gone so well that now they need to leave, and you're sending out leaders and now you have holes where they were and you have to lead that kind of a change. So change will be caused by the fact that people change. Another reason you'll need to lead change is the environment changes. Now think of the different environment we're in now as opposed to just months ago. Who would have thought that this seminar would be online and we wouldn't be physically together in Wisła? It would be hard. If you told me 4 months ago that I would be 3 months in quarantine because of COVID-19 and that 5 million people around the world would catch this disease, I would say no. But the world changes around us in ways that are outside of our control, and we need to respond. Now, it's not just things like a virus that's spreading around the world, but things like the environment, even in our church. I was visiting a church, speaking at a church not far from here where I live, and noticed that all the men were sitting on one side and all the women on the other. And it was kind of strange to me. Even couples were separated. The man was on one side, the woman was on the other. And I asked someone afterwards and why that was, and they said, "Oh, because we don't want to tempt people into sin." And I was like, can that really be the reason? A husband sitting next to his wife, that seems like that would be positive. And then someone pulled me aside and said, "No, let me tell you the history of this. When this building was built, there was a wood heater, and it was on the right side of the building, which meant that the right side of the sanctuary was very warm and the left side was very cold. And so all the men took the cold side and left the warm side for the women. It was a very good reason to put the women right, put them near the fire." But he said, some years later, we changed our heating system and now both sides are warm. But everyone's forgotten the reason why. So sometimes things are started with a really good reason, but the reason changes and we don't change with it. It's true about traditional churches. Sometimes you go into a church and I was in a church once where the liturgy was all sung. And that just struck me as interesting. We don't do that in our church. We don't sing the liturgy. You don't have to sing to be a pastor. But then I asked the question why that was, and they said, well, for many years, there were no sound systems in these churches. And in order for people to hear, they could understand the words better if they were sung, spoken. And that was the same reason why the worship was accompanied by an organ because at that time it was the loudest instrument that could be played without electricity. Now, many years later, we have electricity, we have a sound system, but sometimes people forget the reasons why things were instituted, and they just think, well, an organ is more spiritual, or singing the liturgy is more spiritual. So maybe we need to return some of those questions and say, what would meet the needs of these people at this time the very best as the environment changes? And then God often will lead us into change on behalf of his people. And I think of someone like Moses who didn't want to lead change. And he was at the burning bush, and God says, I've seen the suffering of my people, and I'm sending you, and you're going to call them out of captivity. And God is about redeeming people, about bringing change in people's lives. And often he'll call you, or he'll call me. And we're going to have to lead that change, maybe against some significant resistance. So I wonder what your situation is right now. And as you think about change, even as you're thinking about these three kinds of change, I wonder what change is ahead of you that you need to lead. And I have a question right here. What one move, what one change, if you're able to accomplish it, would most increase the effectiveness of your team or the ministry that you're leading? And I want you to just stop for a minute and just think about that. If you're taking notes, write it down on your page. So what one change, if you could lead any change in the next 6 months, a change that would make a real difference, what would that be? So just stop right now. Think about that, write that down. Now, what that change is, I wonder if it's turn your church more outward to the lost, or get more of a team approach to your ministry, or pull someone else into leadership, or maybe change the way you're doing your worship service, or could be many different things. Redirect the focus of your organization. And as you think about that, here's another question. Is this an adaptive or technical challenge? And you may say, what in the world do you mean by that? Is it an adaptive or technical challenge? Some years ago, I had the opportunity to spend a week at Harvard University in an executive education course. And I was the only pastor there. I was the only, maybe one of the few Christians. There were people from all over the world who were involved in government, training ambassadors, military leaders, and they were all studying leadership and leading change. And I was able to spend a week with these two, Heifetz and Linsky. They're actually Jewish, and they spent all their lives studying leadership and change. And I'd highly recommend this book, Leadership on the Line. I'll be using some of their change theory as we talk in this, but also showing you how the key leaders in the Bible use these principles as well. So if you think about leaders that brought change, you can think about leaders like Moses, or like Nehemiah, who got a wall built in Jerusalem, or like David, who brought a real change after Saul in his country. So you think about those two things, but they say that there are two types of leadership. One is technical leadership. Technical leadership, they say, is applying existing or known solutions to the problems at hand. So it would be like, let's say that you're leading a retreat, and you have to figure out how to feed the people there. And so you think, well, do we cater? Do we have someone bring it in? Do we have some of our really good women in our church? They'll volunteer, they'll cook for us. Do we have everyone just bring their own food and make sandwiches? And you think about these different options. Every one of those options that you think about has a solution that you reach and grab off the shelf. It's just it's a known solution, and you're deciding which one of them to use. Or you might say, we need to get all of our people from here to the retreat location. And you can say, do we rent a bus? It costs this. Do we all ride the train? Do we walk? All of those are known solutions, and you're just deciding which one. But what about Moses, who has to feed all those people in the wilderness, and he's never done this before? In fact, no one's ever done it before. What about David, when he's traveling around with that band of men and trying to stay alive, between Saul and the Philistines. He didn't have experience of doing that. Nehemiah, he'd been a cupbearer in the courts of the king, but he'd never built a wall. He didn't know how. It's not something that you just Google wall building and have the answer for. And all of those tasks were adaptive, what they call adaptive leadership. We had to lead people through a process of discovering solutions that they and you don't know, and making the adaptive changes that will make them more fit for the challenges or problems they face. So the adaptation is that you're taking them to a destination that you're not sure how to get there. And also that the destination is not just pulling something off of a shelf, but it involves learning new skills. It may be even that you said we're going to start bringing guitar music to our church and not just do the organ. But that might not be a technical leadership change, because it might involve changing your perspective on worship, and someone might need to learn to play guitar, and you might have to change some of the culture of your church. So adaptive leadership is about just not applying a solution that you know, but actually going through a process of change that's more complex and adapting. And here's the crazy thing is the leader doesn't totally know how to get to his destination. And this is one of the things that Heifetz and Lewinsky say. They say every people problems for which they do, in fact, have the necessary know-how and procedures. We call these technical problems. But there is a whole host of problems that are not amenable, means they can't be addressed, to authoritative expertise or standard operating procedure. They cannot be solved by someone who provides answers from on high, who just, you call up Google and he tells you what to do. We call these adaptive challenges because they require experiments, new discoveries, and adjustments from numerous places in the organization or community. And without learning new ways, changing attitudes, values, and behaviors, people cannot make the necessary leap to thrive in the new environment. The sustainability of change depends on having the people with the problem internalize the change themselves. And then Heifetz and Linsky said this, they said, the single most common source of leadership failure we've been able to identify in politics, community life, business, and the nonprofit sector is that people, especially those in positions of authority, treat adaptive challenges like technical problems. In other words, they just look for a solution off the shelf to make a quick change, when actually the process of change requires a difficult adaptation. So here's a question. Is that challenge that you have technical or adaptive? Is that change? And I would say if that change is significant, and if it's been hard to bring about, if it's more than just telling people, we're going to change, then it could be an adaptive challenge. And that might take a different skill. It might take a skill of leadership that we all may need to learn. Now, here's another interesting piece that we have to understand. Why is adaptive leadership so difficult? In fact, their book, Leadership on the Line, their subtitle says, Staying Alive in the Dangers of Leadership. They said it's actually really dangerous to lead adaptively. And here's why. There's three things that everyone expects from their leaders. They expect them to give direction. Tell us where we're going to go. Give us direction. To give us protection. In other words, make it safe on the way there. So tell us, are we going to Prague and are we going on the train? And are you going to make sure that we don't get COVID-19 on the train, that it's safe? And then order. We want to make sure that when we get to the train station, the train actually is there, that when you tell us we're leaving at 8, that we really are. Because direction, protection, and order, those are things that really make us settle down. We're not as afraid. We have clarity. And actually, most people will give leadership to the person who offers them direction, protection, and order. But here's the problem with adaptive challenges is that it's very hard to give direction, protection, and order in the midst of the challenges. Think about Moses. He comes And he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says no. And then he tells the people of Israel that they have to start building bricks without straw. And there's a really interesting verse in Exodus 5, which if you have your Bibles, you can turn there. But you find that not only is Pharaoh not responding, but even the people that Moses is trying to lead into freedom are having a hard time. And they basically say, what have you, the people of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh. Well, let me get a little bit farther. 5 verse 20, and said, the Lord look on you and judge you because you made a stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants and to put a sword in their hand to kill us. Those are saying you were leading us into change, and it actually got worse. And here's the issue with adaptive leadership is it's hard to bring change. And sometimes things get worse before they get better. They get worse before they get better. And so it's hard to stay alive in that challenge of leadership. Not only that, but anytime you bring change, you face the task of inertia. So everything has weight, and like this Bible has weight. And if I change direction of this Bible, actually the inertia, the weight of the Bible, the weight of whatever it is, let's say another book. Let's not use the Bible here. Another book here. The weight of this book actually resists that change. And so it's hard for people to change. It's scary for them to change. There's an inertia that keeps us going in the same direction. And change, actually we're not as much afraid of change as we are afraid of loss. And loss doesn't come. It's not even. So let me just give you an example. Here's a couple. We talked about Moses leading that change, but let me tell you 2 changes that I've been involved in. One last summer, one right now as COVID-19 is going on. But coming up to last summer, one of the youth leader in our church, I serve as an elder in our church, and the youth leader in our church came to the elders and said, I want to cancel our evangelistic outreach camp this summer. And my first response was, absolutely not. Don't do this change for several reasons. One is it's an evangelistic camp. Why would we want to cancel it? Second, it is an English camp. And actually, I wear 2 hats. I'm an elder, but I'm also leading an organization that's helping my church do this camp. And we send teams from the United States and do all this work to put these camps together. And all of a sudden, the youth leader in my church doesn't want the thing that my organization is providing. So I'm feeling a little resistant to this. Another thing is that not only that, but we have a church that's committed to come and help us with this camp from the United States, this outreach camp. And we're hoping for a long-term partnership with this church. This is our first experience with them. And if we say no to them, where will our partnership go? They could help us with a number of different projects. And so we don't want to say no to them. And so my first response was, Boja, who's the name of our youth leader, absolutely not. No way. So here I am. I'm used to leading change, but I was resisting change like crazy because as I looked into the change, all I could see was loss. That change was going to bring loss. When they were looking at that change, they were just saying, Moses, things weren't good, and now you made them worse. And that loss was going to be painful, and I said no. What we don't realize is that often, if we're the one leading change, you're trying to say, let's get some more guitar music instead of that organ music. It's for somebody that's a threat. For somebody that's a loss, for somebody that is very tied into wonderful memories they have. And it's difficult for people to bring that kind of change. Another change we're facing right now is that this summer, we're coming up to summer. Generally, our organization in the summer does 120, 130 outreach camps all across Central and Eastern Europe. And we staff them with people from the United States, from the UK, from Canada. Well, none of them can come. And many of these countries can't do camps. And so all of a sudden we're thinking, how do we manage this change? And even things like like this conference going online. Well, it's painful to try to change. Well, let's say you're leading it. Let's say you're Boja. Let's say you're the one who's leading this change. What do you need to know about that change process? What does adaptive leadership look like? Well, here's kind of a picture that can help us see what's going on and understand maybe what we need to do. First of all, there's a path that's well traveled, that we've all traveled before. There's a way your organization works. There's a way your church works. There's a way your denomination works, and you all know that path. And by the way, that path is bringing certain outcomes. And someone said every organization is perfectly designed to achieve the results it's currently achieving. So in other words, that what you're doing is producing the kinds of things that you're experiencing. And so it's bringing certain technical solutions. There's certain ways of doing things that are bringing certain outcomes. Well, let's say that you wanted a different outcome. So Boja, when he was explaining this to the elders, he said this. He said, we've had lots of people come to faith in Christ in these last years, but we're losing them. They're coming in one door out and then out the other. In fact, he said, I have a list of names of 100 young people who have professed faith in Christ, and we don't have contact with them anymore. He said, somehow we've got to get our core group healthy enough to handle these new Christians. Otherwise, they're just going to be coming in one door and out the other. And he was describing some future. He said, and if we do, then what we can see is many more people come to trust Christ, and we'll keep a hold of them. We won't lose them. So he started describing this outcome, but here's the thing. He doesn't, and we don't know how to get there. So as we as an organization are facing this upcoming summer, we know that we lost 1,000 short-term workers, and that in many of these countries that we're working in, we're not going to be able to do our camps. And we would love to see an outcome where as many people are reached with the gospel as if we were doing all these camps. But we have no idea how to get there. Kind of like what Moses was saying. Let's get to the promised land. He could describe that destination, but the path, he'd never led a whole nation out of a country like Egypt across the desert. He'd never done that. There wasn't highways and particular gas stations along the way set up because people did this all the time. This was going to be totally new. So how do you find your way there? Well, there's a couple of skills of adaptive leadership. One is, in order to find that solution, you actually have to raise the heat. You have to raise the heat. And this is something that Boja did in his meeting with the elders. He did it by saying, I look at these 100 names of people who've put their faith in Christ, and we don't have contact with them anymore. He said, we've done these camps for a number of years, and we're not holding on to the new believers. Well, he raised the heat for us. And then he said, here's something else. He said, the entire youth team have gotten together, and we fasted and prayed, and we're really sensing that God wants us to do a camp this summer that builds deeply into the Christians and allows us to go after some of those new believers and get them grounded, not an evangelistic camp. And he said, well, I feel like if we do that, we'll be ready then to reach out again. Well, he's raising the heat, which actually wasn't very fun for us elders to hear. We said, well, what's that camp going to look like? He said, I don't know. He said, we're working on it. And here's another thing is you actually have to put the pieces together and cook it for a while because you've never done anything like this before. So maybe some of you have adapted to, you're trying to work, what does it mean to do church online? Well, it takes a while. You have to put some ingredients in and put the heat on it and work on it for a while. You have to cook this solution. He couldn't just tell us it's going to work exactly like this because he didn't know yet. And we had some issues like what happens if we lose this church partnership? Well, that's a piece of that stew. What happens to the people we were going to reach this summer and we won't? That's a piece of that stew too. Now, another thing that happens in this process is that that this process, they call it disequilibration of cooking an answer to a solution that you don't have yet, it's very difficult for people and it's very challenging. Actually, for me as an elder, it was very difficult. I was going, wait, don't. This is threatening me as a leader of a mission organization. This is threatening me as an elder of our local church. And it's easy for people to eject, which means maybe they just go, I'm out, or they pull a power play or something like that. It's very easy to people, and we find that even as we're working for this summer. Wow, how do we do outreaches in when people are under quarantine? And it's very easy to say it's not possible. We just need to wait till this is all over. We can't expect God to do anything now. And you just eject from the process. And so because of that, sometimes you actually have to lower the heat. You have to bring things down to disequilibrate and say, now wait, let's talk about this. We don't have to do this change. I'm presenting this as a proposal. We still have time to look it over. You might say, let's do a small try and see how it works. Sometimes you have to lower the heat because it's actually, the change is too disruptive and people are going to be ejecting or fighting each other, or fragmenting, going all into pieces. But it's also easy for people to do this, to just do plug and play answers, bring things back to technical solution. And actually it was tempting as we were the elders to say, Boja, shut up and just do this camp. We could just use a power play. We could just bring him back to the technical solution and say, come under authority. You have to do this camp. And so there's pressure or to do this plug and play solutions. Just look for something off the shelf, something that someone else has done and just take it and copy it, when maybe we need a solution that we haven't seen before, that we have to cook together. But what we really want is we want to keep the heat up for long enough to where we can actually find an answer, find an adaptive solution. But we're going to have to keep working on it and keep it all together, because actually adaptive solutions are a lot of work and they take some time. And we have to find a way. So, think of Moses and the amount of time that it took him to get the people to the promised land. But what an adaptive solution. It resulted in the nation of Israel then having their homeland for many, many hundreds of years. Nehemiah, the work it took him to build the wall, but when it was done, the nation of Israel had a wall. So it's the process of finding this route there. Now, because of that, there are 7 skills of an adaptive leader. And adaptive leadership is really an art. It's not a science. It's hard. It's difficult. It doesn't go on a straight line. And it takes really some learning, but it's a different mode than just saying, should we take the train or should we take a bus? It's how do we keep the right people engaged for long enough and listen to the different voices until we really find a solution. And part of the skill of this is raising and lowering the heat. So an adaptive leader has to be able to raise the heat, and then he has to know when to lower it too. One of the things that Boja did was he said, here's this list of 100 people we've lost. What do we do about them? Asking the hard questions. How come it's just we've got an open door coming in and an open door going out? Asking the hard question raises the heat. Sometimes just looking forward and saying, our trajectory is going to send us here. A friend of mine in Latvia who's raised the heat on church planting for his country, one of the things that he did was he said, if we go forward on the same trajectory, our denomination is going to have half as many churches in 15 years. Because what he saw was the churches were getting smaller and the pastors were getting older. And he said, this is where we're going. So unless we change our direction, this is where we will be. And he raised the heat because people went, well, we don't want to end up there. Well, if we don't, we're going to have to bring change. This is what, think of what Moses did. He came to Pharaoh and he said, Pharaoh, I've come from God. And he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, no. And then Moses came back and he said it again. And then you have these plagues. Now, I'm not recommending that you do any plagues, but he raised the heat, and then he raised it some more, and then he raised it some more. And the heat was on Moses too, it was on everyone, till the point where finally and he had to lower the heat sometimes for the Israelite people, go and tell them, hey, God's in this, to where he could get that change. Not an easy process, raising and lowering the heat, and it won't be pleasant for you or for other people. Sometimes lowering the heat again is saying, let's slow this down a little bit. Let's try a little change. Maybe let's try one song with the guitar and 6 songs with the organ. Let's try just one meeting in this new location and see if it works. That might be ways of lowering the heat so that people can actually handle that change. Because again, it's going to be difficult for them. And here's, so there we go back. Now, back to that raising the heat and lowering the heat. This is a hard process. It's hard because the heat's not fun. It's hard because you don't know the answer yet. It's hard because you're starting to talk about maybe leaving some things that you know work, and for something you don't know works yet. And the other thing is there will be loss. Maybe the person who plays the organ is not going to have as many songs. And you remember that I'm saying that, wow, if we don't do an English camp in our church, what does that say about me, the leader of an organization that's providing those camps? I feel horrible. There's loss involved in that. And here's the second skill, is empathy. And this is one of the skills of an adaptive leader, is actually to stop and feel. This is something also that we find in Exodus. We've been talking about God's story of bringing the nation of Israel out of Egypt, which was, wow, an adaptive challenge for Moses. And in the 6th chapter of Exodus, verse 5, he says, this is actually God speaking. He says, moreover, I've heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant. This is God, who doesn't have to feel with them. He is enthroned on high and is sovereignly in control of everything. And yet he allows himself to empathize with his people. And he says, I've heard their groanings. And as we lead change, it's important to actually hear groaning and to empathize with it. Realize that those emotions are very real. A little bit later in verse 9, Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. So let's say you were leading that church where all of the men were sitting on one side and the women were sitting on the other, and you said, hey, that's an old way of approaching it. Now the stove is central, and so it's not about heat on one side and not on another. So we just need to all mix. You might need to empathize with the man who's been sitting on that side with his friends all along and know that this change may be very difficult for him. And even though you might move ahead with that change, the fact that you go, oh, this is difficult, this is hard, increase your ability to lead change. Sometimes we just focus on what's the right direction. And one of the feedback from members of our team is, Dave, you have to stop and feel with them and just acknowledge what they're going through right now. And so actually I wrote a letter to our team, and this was in the 7th week of quarantine. And I said, as I write you, we're entering our 7th week of quarantine. I'm praying for you today, as I know this is a long and draining time for all of us. Everything takes so much more energy than it normally would. And I'm sure many of you are feeling weary and ready for a change. And then I say the strain will pop up in all kinds of unexpected places, in tension with family or close friends, in difficulty sleeping, and in lower levels of energy or motivation. I just empathize with them. What I found was that actually gave oxygen to them, and they were ready then to lift their eyes and head into that period of change. So empathy is important. When we were discussing the issue with our elders about what we were going to do with the summer, we got in a little discussion that got quite heated, and there was opinions that were being shared back and forth that were different. And I remember after that one of the other elders said, wow, you kept interrupting that other elder, and he really felt like you weren't listening to him. And I actually had to go apologize because I wasn't stopping and empathizing with him. And because of that, the change was locking up. So the skill of empathy is very important as we're leading people through the painful, often painful process of change. Here is the third skill. Okay, then you see that we're moving in this picture again. The third skill is actually cooking the stew. So raise and lower the heat, empathize with how this is all making people feel. And then there's the process of keeping the questions going for long enough to find that adaptive solution. And you don't know what the solution is. We don't know what the summer is going to look like. We don't know how we're going to handle this request from the ministry team of the youth group to cancel their summer camp. But you have to keep the process going and add different pieces. It's like you cut up some carrots and put them in, and then you say, we need a little bit more salt. Well, we need to add more water. And you're adding different pieces and then mixing them together and keeping the heat on it for long enough to get that adaptive solution. So sometimes you might have to bring in pieces from other places, say, were there any things that other churches have done? Sometimes you have to say, we haven't heard from you in a while. What's your perspective? Sometimes you have to purposely bring other viewpoints in, ideas from other places. And sometimes you have to ask the question, what, God, are you doing? What are we missing about what you're doing and how you're working? And then you have to stay with it for a while. It's important to listen to dissenting voices, people who don't agree, because there's often key pieces. Maybe not everything they're sharing is important, but there are key perspectives that you need to not miss if you're really going to get this stew. It might even take some time. So cooking that stew. And one of the things that we did with our team was we did something we called Apollo 13. We got 100 members of our team together online, and we spent 2 days, 6 hours a day, just working through this question of what we're going to do this summer. And we spent about an hour saying, what are our current conditions? Then another hour saying, what are some of the problems we need to solve? And together, it's like we put them all in a pot and then turned up the heat and together worked on this. Now you see this picture from the movie Apollo 13, if you've seen this movie before. We use this as a metaphor of being on a mission and then having something happen that dramatically changes the mission. In Apollo 13, something blew up and they had to change their entire plan. And I said, our summer has blown up and now we need to change our entire plan. How do we pull the right people together and adapt, pivot to this? So you can see some people on the screen. Here we are, people from all over Central and Eastern Europe gathering together, working on this. And we just try to cook this stew, bring in various perspectives, ideas, work on this together. You see down at the bottom, if you can see that there's 92 participants, and we worked for about 12 hours on this. Now, one of the things that's important when you're doing adaptive leadership is that you don't create horseless carriages. What I mean is you adapt to new conditions, you have to actually change the way that you do everything. When they invented carriages, they just took the horse off and put an engine on it and thought, oh, this will work. But you notice it doesn't have a bumper, it doesn't have a windshield wiper, it's not prepared to go as fast as a car is going to go. So you have to work your solution over and over again until you actually bring the innovations, like here are some of them, like a bumper or like windshield wipers or like a cover for the back that allows it to work in the new context. Horseless carriages, often we create those in that adaptive process. Keep working till you get something that works in your new environment. And also recognize that you don't move from idea to application in a straight line. The process of innovation actually has a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of development along the way. So the good ideas that you see were actually cooked over, try this, oh, that won't work, try this. And sometimes even you try it in your mind. You try this idea and then you realize it won't work, and you go back and you say, well, what could? And you come out again. So as elders, we were thinking, well, do we just cancel the church that's supposed to come from the States? Well, we don't want to do that. Well, what if we did this? What if we did this? And we're trying different things and trying to stay with it until we have something that we think would work. So we want to cook the stew. Cook the stew. Now, here's the fourth one. Maintaining horizontal and vertical forces. So maintaining horizontal and vertical forces. Let me tell you why. Because cooking the stew creates a lot of pressure. And it's hard to keep this whole thing together. And horizontal containing forces are the things that keep people together. Vertical containing forces are the ones that keep us going the same direction. And so we have to kind of keep people together. This is very important, and keep us moving towards our goal. There's going to be a tendency for people to break apart. It's going to be a tendency to say the old people against the young people, or the people from a nonprofit organization against others, the American against the Czech. It's easy for things to break apart. The drivers against the people, the goal-oriented people against those who are focused on care. And we've got to keep pulling us back together and say, no, we're together in this, and keep asking the question, what's God doing? And uniting around our outcomes. And so sometimes we would pull back and we just say, we've got to remind ourselves that we're really all working towards the same thing, that what we want is the kingdom of God to go forward. And so we're working together towards that same goal. And we had to bring things together. And by the way, the stronger your relationships and the clearer your united goal, the more heat you're going to be able to handle. So you'll be able to cook things at a higher intensity and a higher level of interaction with a lot more forces coming in if you've got strong relationships that hold you together, and if you have a clear outcome that you're all committed to that's the same. If you don't have strong relationships and you don't have a clear outcome, it will break apart at a much lower level of heat, and you won't be able to cook those solutions with the same intensity. You just won't be able to handle it. It'll fly apart. And this was actually when I talked about apologizing to the other elder. I had to do some work to hold together the containing forces, because there were pressures that were pulling us apart because of our different opinions. We had to say we're committed to each other and we're committed to these outcomes. Maintaining horizontal and vertical containing forces, things that contain us together. And then we talked earlier about the fact that leaders become leaders because of direction, protection, and order. And those things are challenged in an adaptive process, but you still have to provide a certain amount of direction. The direction, though, is not that we're going to do this, but the direction can be, we want an outcome. We said we want an outcome with our church that blesses the young people and blesses the old people and blesses our partner church that has just entered into this with us. We want an outcome from the summer that engages our team, accomplishes the Great Commission, and takes into account the current coronavirus that we're under. So we would give direction, not with an outcome that we're moving towards, but with a goal that we're going to reach, and that would keep us going in that direction. You need protection. So you have to say, we're gonna protect the dissenter. We're gonna protect our people who are under pressure right now. We're not going to destroy people along the way. And that's actually very important, is that people hear a shepherding heart from the leader, and that we're going to watch out for the people who are impacted by this. Not just, hey, those people that want to sit on two different sides of the room, they're just so stupid, we don't care about them. Or the ones who are committed to the organ and don't want guitars in the front. Oh, they're just from another generation. Well, there needs to be protection for everyone involved, and people need to hear that from the leader. And then order. Sometimes you can't say what the outcome is going to be, but you can order a process. And so in our Apollo 13 process, we said we're going to spend an hour on this question, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to work on this question. And by the end of the day, we hope to get to here. And so we ordered our process. And again, sometimes when you can't have the conclusion and give them certainty by the outcome, you can settle people down when they know this is the first thing we're going to work on, then we're going to work on this, and then we're going to work on first of all, we're going to evaluate the needs. Second, we're going to figure out what's our outcome. Third, we're going to do a lot of ideas. Fourth, we're going to figure out which is the best of those ideas. Fifth, something like that, some process. And by the way, that process I'm just giving you right now is one that we often use. It's called NOIP. So I'll give this to you quickly. It's needs, objectives, ideas, plan, evaluation. So let's start with needs, evaluating what the context is. Then let's figure out what our goal is, objectives. And then we'll go to ideas. What are all the different ways that we can accomplish this? And then we'll try to make our plan. And then at the end, we'll evaluate, will this really meet the needs and accomplish the objectives? Often people just go idea, plan, and they never do needs and objectives. So often we'll use a NOIP acrostic to keep us on track, but you might use something else. So direction, protection, order. Now, there it is. There's that adaptive process. And actually, in our local church, we came up with the idea of, well, the youth group actually has done a great job of outreach. The adults haven't as much. What if we use the team from the States and do a family festival in our town? And so actually this tension, this cooking of the stew, this problem that the youth leaders brought to us resulted in something last year that we'd never done before, a family fest, where for 4 days we opened up a center in our town and did things for the kids and a lecture every night for parents. And it was one of the best outreaches we've ever done in this town. Because of that, we have a deeper relationship with the mayor. Because of that, we have relationships with many other non-believers in this town. And actually, there have been 4 people who've trusted Christ in the 6 months that followed that family fest that wouldn't have if we hadn't done it. And all of that came out of tension between the tension caused by the youth team coming and saying they didn't want to do that outreach camp. The other thing was the youth team did a disciple-making camp that was fabulously successful and has resulted in one of the strongest years of youth ministry that we've had. So that cooking process, even though it was difficult for all of us, brought outcomes that are really exciting. We've got a lot of innovative ideas for the summer. Our Apollo 13 process, I don't know what's going to be the final outcome of it, but I'm excited that there's some great innovation happening. And one of the things about adaptive leadership is that if it's done well, it can result in solutions that you never thought of that are a great blessing to all of your congregation. And this is what happened with Moses. If you get a little bit farther in Exodus, you'll see that the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power the Lord used against the Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servants. Now, this wasn't the end of the adaptive process because there's another 40 years of wandering, but you can see that the people are moving. They're in a different place right now, and they're seeing God work in really powerful ways. Because Moses hangs in there with that adaptive leadership challenge. And I think Nehemiah was an incredible adaptive leader. Moses, of course, was. David was. Daniel was. And as you think about at the beginning of this session here, and I'm going to stop share so you can come back and see me, I asked you to identify a key leadership challenge you're facing. And then I asked the question, is this an adaptive challenge or a technical challenge? I just want you to think back to that challenge right now and go, I wonder if I led in an adaptive kind of way. So if I raise the heat, and sometimes I have to lower it, if I am, and I got to get the order on this, if I empathize with people, if I cook the stew, right? If I maintain the horizontal and vertical containing forces and then provided direction, protection, order, those 7 skills, and just work that process to try to move us towards a solution that we don't know yet, but we might reach if we could just hang in the process together, that disequilibration long enough. I wonder what kind of solution that you'd get. So this is, by the way, a quick introduction to adaptive leadership. You can buy that book I showed you at the beginning. Think more on this, but I just pray that God uses some insight from this to encourage and challenge you. And thank you for gathering with me today. And if you're going back and listening to this end now later, thanks for being willing to do that. I pray that God uses all of you to bless and further his kingdom through your excellent, outstanding, faith-filled leadership for his glory.